Picture this. Europe, a continent bound by common policies but fractured by differing ambitions. Now, Spain, a pivotal player in this complex geopolitical chessboard, has made a daring move. But what exactly does this mean? And why has Europe's reaction been so quiet? Spain has dramatically altered its stance on China, a shift that has left Europe stunned and speechless. Few saw this coming, and it's far more than a simple trade dispute over electric vehicles. The stakes are higher. This move impacts global power dynamics, influence, and the future trajectory of Europe's relations with China. Spain's sudden break from the European Union's plan to impose hefty tariffs, up to 38%, on Chinese electric vehicles, EVs, has sent shockwaves across the continent. Only weeks ago, such tariffs seemed inevitable. European car manufacturers were struggling to compete against China's booming EV market, with companies like BYD and NEO flooding the European market with affordable, high-quality cars. The tariffs were viewed as necessary to protect local car makers. So why did Spain pull the plug? The answer could lie in Spain's growing economic reliance on China. Spain's trade with China has soared by 15% in the past year, and 7% of Spain's total exports are now bound for China, including valuable goods like machinery, electronics, and agricultural products. With such strong trade ties, it's clear that Spain has more to lose from a standoff with China than many other European nations. Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez seems to be playing the long game, carefully balancing EU unity with the reality of Spain's dependence on China's vast market. Sánchez's meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping earlier this year was not just ceremonial, it was a strategic dialogue about trade agreements. Behind the handshake, Spain secured deeper economic cooperation with China. As a result, exports to China surged by 12% in early 2024. Spain's agricultural products, industrial machinery, and even some tech exports have seen a spike in demand. In the face of this growing trade momentum, Spain has managed to delay the EU's proposed tariffs. By opposing them, Spain is effectively buying time for its domestic automotive industry to adjust to this new competitive reality. It's not just about cars. Spain's economic future is entwined with China's rise, making any disruption in this relationship potentially disastrous. In fact, Spain's foreign policy shift signals a deeper strategic alignment with China. The South China Morning Post recently described this as Spain's economic diplomacy, how Spain's economy has increasingly intertwined with China's, from technology investments to agricultural imports. With this mounting economic dependency, a tariff war over EVs could have severe repercussions for Spain's broader economy. If you're finding this analysis insightful, please give us a like, share with others, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement helps us grow. Now let's talk about Europe's automotive industry, a sector fighting for survival. Over the last decade, Europe has watched as its automotive giants, Volkswagen, Peugeot, and others, lost ground to China's burgeoning electric vehicle market. In 2023 alone, European car exports fell by 9%, while imports of Chinese EVs skyrocketed by 18%. This trend is even more alarming considering Chinese EVs aren't just flooding the market. They're outperforming European models in quality too. Chinese electric vehicles are gaining serious ground, outpacing European competitors in key markets. Chinese brands are not only competing on price, but also on customer satisfaction, with recent reports showing higher ratings for Chinese EVs in Europe compared to many local brands. To protect its manufacturers, the EU had proposed tariffs. The idea was to level the playing field by making Chinese EVs more expensive, giving European car makers a chance to catch up. But with Spain refusing to back the tariff plan, the entire strategy is at risk. The EU could find itself caught between protecting its own car makers and managing its critical trade relationships with China. This decision, however, could backfire. Spain is particularly vulnerable in two industries: automotive manufacturing and agriculture. Spain is Europe's second-largest car producer, but unlike Germany, it focuses on mid-market models, which are particularly at risk from China's cheaper, high-tech alternatives. A trade dispute with China could push up manufacturing costs, making Spanish cars more expensive and less competitive globally. This danger is not just hypothetical. Spain's agricultural sector is deeply connected to China. A staggering 40% of Spain's pork exports go to China, which represents a trade valued at over $1.5 billion annually. A trade war could result in retaliatory tariffs that devastate Spain's agricultural economy, harming the livelihoods of farmers and workers across the country. If China decides to target Spanish agricultural exports, such as pork, olive oil, and wine, it could trigger a crisis in rural Spain. Professor Juan Moreno, an agricultural economist at the University of Seville, warned that this would have dire consequences for the thousands of workers dependent on these industries. The stakes are incredibly high. Spain's decision to oppose the EU tariffs may seem like a tactical move in the short term, but it's a delicate balancing act. A misstep could trigger significant economic fallout, affecting everything from car manufacturing to agricultural exports. Spain's strategy may be built on a vision of deepening ties with China, but it also risks exposing the country to retaliatory measures that could send shockwaves through its economy. If China's vast market is threatened, the effects on Spain's industries could be catastrophic. With this pivot, Spain has shown that it's positioning itself as an intermediary between Europe and China. But whether this strategy will pay off or lead to unforeseen economic consequences remains to be seen. As Europe's automotive and agricultural sectors brace for the next move, the continent must reckon with the shifting tides of global trade and the rising influence of China. The battle over luxury goods and technology, Europe versus China. When it comes to economic pressure, China is notorious for not backing down. If the European Union imposes tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, EVs, Beijing is likely to retaliate with countermeasures that could target key European industries. But which sectors are most vulnerable? The answer is clear: luxury goods and technology. Europe's high-end brands, from LVMH to Hermes, rely heavily on China's affluent consumers. In 2023, Chinese shoppers accounted for nearly 30% of global luxury spending, according to Bain & Company. A backlash from China could force these brands to rethink their entire market strategy. On the technology front, Europe exports billions of euros in equipment to China each year. As the EU's second-largest trading partner, any disruption to this relationship would have severe consequences for the European economy. The EU's tariffs and China's response. China has the ability to disrupt entire industries if it feels cornered. European tariffs on Chinese EVs could trigger a trade war that Europe may not be prepared to handle, as noted by Elizabeth Brau, a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, in a recent Wall Street Journal op-ed. Germany's opposition to tariffs on Chinese EVs is rooted in its automotive industry. Giants like Volkswagen, BMW, and Mercedes-Benz have substantial investments in China. In 2023, Volkswagen alone sold over 35 million vehicles in China, accounting for nearly 40% of its global sales. A loss of access to the Chinese market would devastate Germany's economy. In contrast, countries like France and Italy are less dependent on China for automotive exports and more focused on protecting their domestic markets. French President Emmanuel Macron has been a vocal advocate for tariffs, arguing that Europe must defend its workers from unfair competition. Europe must defend itself, he said in a recent speech covered by Le Figaro. The divisions within the EU, the divide between countries like Germany, France, and Italy highlights growing tensions within the EU. Germany, with its strong economic ties to China, is hesitant to escalate tensions, while France and Italy, feeling the brunt of Chinese competition, are pushing for stronger protectionist measures. Spain's decision to break from the EU's tariff proposal further exposes the fault lines in Europe. The EU is struggling to maintain a unified stance on China as individual countries prioritize their own economic interests. This division goes beyond trade; it's also a political issue. Europe finds itself at a crossroads, with some nations advocating for deeper integration and others pushing for a more flexible, nation-first approach. A recent Economist headline captured the growing rift: the Great European Divide, how China is driving a wedge between EU members. This dilemma will undoubtedly shape the future of Europe's relationship with China for years to come. The numbers speak for themselves. Let's break down the numbers. In 2023, China's trade surplus with the EU reached a staggering 400 billion euros. This imbalance is driven by Europe's high demand for Chinese goods like electronics, machinery, and EVs, while the Chinese market does not reciprocate with equal exports. This surplus is a growing concern for European leaders and gives China significant leverage in negotiations. As Europe becomes more dependent on Chinese imports, China gains more control over European economies. If China decides to tighten the economic noose, Europe's position becomes even more precarious. Spain, in particular, is trying to navigate this delicate balance, opting to prioritize dialogue over conflict, unlike France and Italy, which see China's growing dominance as a direct threat. Spain's strategic move. Spain's refusal to support the EU's tariff proposal is a calculated move. Spain is positioning itself as a bridge between Europe and China, aware of the significant economic benefits at stake. China is now Spain's third-largest trading partner, and exports to China increased by over 15% in 2023. Spanish industries like machinery, agriculture, and pharmaceuticals are benefiting from this growing trade relationship. But it's not just about trade. Chinese investment in Spain, particularly in technology, infrastructure, and renewable energy, is also on the rise. In 2023, Chinese direct investment in Spain exceeded 5 billion euros. Spain understands that this investment is crucial for its long-term economic development, and by refusing to back the EU's tariffs, Spain hopes to maintain a strategic position within the global trade network. Spain's government is advocating for a more flexible, pragmatic approach to EU-China relations, aiming to carve out a leadership role that doesn't simply follow the directives of France or Germany. This position could define Spain's influence within the EU for years to come. The upcoming vote and the stakes Spain's decision to oppose the proposed tariffs has thrown the EU's plans into turmoil. The EU is preparing for a crucial vote on these tariffs, and Spain's position could change the outcome. With Germany already hesitant and Spain stepping back, the unity of the EU on this issue is now in question. If the vote fails to pass, it will send a message to Beijing that Europe is not as unified as it appears when it comes to China. The consequences of this division could be significant, both for the EU's internal cohesion and its negotiating power on the global stage. If the tariffs are implemented, Spain and other dissenting countries will face the potential backlash of economic retaliation from China. It's a high-stakes game that will test the EU's ability to navigate these complex trade dynamics, global ramifications, and the ripple effect. This conflict between Europe and China doesn't just affect the two regions. Its effects are felt across the globe. As China continues to expand its Belt and Road Initiative, investing in countries across Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia, Europe risks losing influence on the world stage if it isolates itself. China's increasing economic footprint will likely attract more willing partners in the developing world, shifting the balance of power. The ongoing trade tensions are creating ripple effects that are being felt in markets worldwide, from raw materials in Africa to tech manufacturing in Southeast Asia. The global economy is undergoing a rapid transformation, and Spain's decision to challenge the EU on tariffs could have far-reaching implications for Europe's place in this shifting order. What lies ahead for Spain and Europe? Spain's refusal to back the EU's tariff proposal is more than just an economic stance. It's a strategic gamble with long-term implications. As Spain navigates the delicate balance between competing economic interests, its role in shaping future EU-China relations will be crucial. The question remains: will Spain's decision to push for dialogue instead of confrontation strengthen its position within Europe, or will it deepen the rift within the EU? As Europe prepares to vote on the tariffs, the world will be watching closely. The outcome of this vote could shape the future of EU-China relations, and ultimately, the global economic landscape. If you've enjoyed this analysis, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to stay updated on future videos. Your support helps us grow and create more content like this. Don't forget to share this video and check out more on our channel.